Well, what an absolute pleasure to welcome to the podcast Dr. Cortney Warren. Cortney, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure to be here with you.
Now, we're talking to a board-certified psychologist, and I do want to just ask you, because even though it may seem and sound obvious, maybe to some not, what does board-certified mean?
It means that you've gone through an extra level of testing and evaluation that really shows you are at the top of your field by your colleagues.
Okay.
You have to pass some exams to really show that you have knowledge in your field. So I'm a clinician. So that means my expertise is in severe mental illness prevention, treatment, assessment.
I do note that, and it's one of the reasons why I was really hoping that we could have this time to have you on the podcast, because of your interest and your research, especially in addictions and self-deception. I do want to come back to that because it's very relevant to the times we're in, and also the very nature of this podcast, the Comeback podcast. And the fact that many, if not most, of the people watching you now, Cortney, or listening to you on audio podcast, have some interest in making a comeback from adversity, maybe because of some very personal involvement, first person, or a close relative, friend or neighbour, or work colleague. So here we have Dr. Cortney Warren, board-certified psychologist and clinician. And she has a blog, and it's the Naked Truth blog, and that catches your eye. And I just do want to ask you, first of all, why the name Naked Truth blog?
A couple of things. First, it's provocative, but I want people to aspire to see the truth in its most raw, brutal form possible, the most naked way possible, where you are literally sitting in front of a mirror, looking at yourself going, oh my gosh, I haven't been able to see reality, but here it is staring me back in the face. It's also because I have a specialty in eating disorders and body image. And so much of my research is also about really getting comfortable with being naked in your own skin and finding a way to feel solid and secure when you're looking at yourself in the most real, honest form.
So there's a metaphor, but then there's a practical reality to what you've just said.
Yes.
Okay. And I noticed one of the blogs that when our listeners and our viewers go to your website, drcortney.com, they'll see that there's a link through to your blog, the Naked Truth blog. And there's one of the articles there that caught my eye, which is titled, I've got it here, The Power of Choice in the Face of Adversity. And you quote Viktor Frankl there about the space between stimulus and response and why that's important with regards and relevant to choice. Can you expand on that for us?
Oh, absolutely. You know, choice is really the crux of the human condition. It's really what makes us uniquely human and uniquely able to craft our own lives. And I think so often in life, and in our most animalistic ways, we have a reaction to a circumstance or a situation that we encounter in life. And our immediate response is to think that the outside world caused this reaction in us, right? That there's some external force and it's responsible for our feeling or our thought or our action. And as Frankl so eloquently said, it really is that space between seeing something outside of yourself and recognizing that you're having an internal reaction to it that gives you the freedom to see yourself more honestly and make a choice moving forward about how you're going to respond to it.
Reminds me a little bit of the Stoic philosopher Seneca when he said it's all in your head, and that some things can seem hard or easy or even amusing. The choice is yours. So Well, Viktor Frankl is one of, and his book, Man's Search for Meaning, is one of my favourite books, and obviously one of yours as well in your read. How do you divide your work between research, which is all research, and being a clinician, which is actually doing one-to-one client work? How do you find the balance there?
I am coming to you as an academic mostly. So I started my career as a professor. I ran a big research lab and I got tenure. And one of my biggest pet peeves was that the large majority of the work that I was doing was clinical research trials. So it involved patients and people who were struggling. But almost everything I did was in my office in front of my computer, analyzing data and writing papers that were only going to reach other academics, other MD, PhDs. And that psychology really is the study of human nature. It's the study of who we are, why we are the way we are, what makes us uniquely human. And really, at its best, it should be used by the public in meaningful ways. So I actually resigned from my tenured academic position. I'm still an adjunct professor and I still teach and I still do a lot of research. But I chose to shift my career to really try to bring solid, empirical, theoretically driven information that's popular in the academic circles of psychology to the mainstream in hopes that people would be able to use it for themselves.
Now I understand. That's and you actually grew up. So I know that you grew up in an academic environment. Both your parents were academics and professors, and you travelled a lot when you were young. And I know that you even spent time, because you can tell by my accent, I'm Australian, and you spent some time living here in Australia, did you not?
I sure did. I was in Fremantle.
Oh,
Frio.
yes, of course. Love it over there in Perth. Well, When was that, by the way?
It was when I was in high school. It was my sophomore or junior year in high school. So I was like 15, 16 years old.
You would have been a novelty insofar as, so you would have had your American accent in Australia in a high school. And so you would have been popular just because of that, I can imagine.
Oh my gosh. I had such an amazing experience there. And I still have friends from high school who I correspond with from Australia. It was truly a gift going to school there. I absolutely loved it.
Have you been able to revisit Australia since those days?
I have, but not for over a decade. It's been a very long time, but I have very fond feelings for Australia.
And just to wind back a little bit, for the earlier days. So here you are in Australia and travelled, and I believe you lived in Argentina as well, and travelled many places with your as part of your family. And so before you were 20, you did all that travelling, and then you reach a stage where you decide you're going to follow a study stroke career path into the human sciences. So what made that decision? Was there a reason?
Oh, absolutely. One of the reasons I think travel is so important, and one of the reasons I talk about it personally, is that it gives you exposure to different nuances of human experiences. And it shows you a lot of the ways that we're so similar, independent of culture or country, and then also ways that we're really pretty different. So traveling a lot as a kid, one of the things that I was so fascinated by was norms around body image and eating. So when I went to a third world country where there wasn't an excess of food and where physical appearance wasn't such a strong determinant of a female gender role, my friends and the people that I would interact with there really had such a different relationship with cooking and eating and their bodies and what they wore and how they felt about themselves that were shockingly different than my friends in the United States and my friends' mothers in the United States, and even in Australia, I have to tell you, and in other places of the world where I didn't know anyone who wasn't on a diet. I didn't know anyone who really felt so secure and confident in their own skin when they were a teenager and a girl, let alone a boy. They probably didn't feel very confident either, but I didn't talk to them about those things at the time. And so traveling really opened my eyes to some questions about how we navigate our physical selves, who's responsible for food, what it means to be of a certain gender and how those responsibilities play out. And so I really wanted to understand how culture and sociocultural factors influence our own individual relationships with ourselves. And that's how I pursued psychology.
Okay. And you're a published author and you're all over the media, I see. Podcasts, you're a guest like you are on my podcast and have been interviewed on TV. And you're an author of four books. And one of the books is Lies We Tell Ourselves, published in 2014. Lies we tell ourselves. What does that mean? The lies we tell ourselves.
The background story on this book is that I was asked to do a TEDx talk, which you may have heard of and know. And it's really just someone who's an expert in a given field who has 15 minutes to give a take-home message to the public on what do you need to know about this topic. And as a psychologist, they came to me and said, so if you were going to tell the public something about psychology, what would you say to them and why? And so I really had to think about it because I could give lectures on so many things relevant to mental health. I could give a talk on diversity and cultural competency or addictions or relationships. But really, the most important take-home message that I could think of to tell anyone out there was that the degree to which you lie to yourself is the degree to which you will stay stuck. That my work with people over the years suggests to me that the main reason I can't get people to change is that they can't admit the truth about who they are and how they're contributing to the situation that they find themselves in. And so Lies We Tell Ourselves, the title, is really trying to help people do that internal check on self-deception for themselves. How do you lie to yourself? Why is it a problem? And how can you change it? And that's how the book actually is like my lecture version of the TED Talk, which was 15 minutes. So that was the short version. But in the process, I wrote a short book about it because I had so much to say.
It's a short book, but it's available, I see, on Amazon. And it's also recorded on Audible, I think, Audible version. Yeah. And I see also that there's some very positive and supportive comments from readers who have bought the book on Amazon. So what is the cost of self-deception? What is the cost in someone's lives of continually lying to yourself?
Well, the biggest cost is that you can't change something you can't admit. And so over time, if you are either believing something that's objectively untrue or trying to convince yourself to believe something that's false, you're going to pass along whatever your self-deceptive lies are to everyone around you. You're going to thwart your own growth and stop yourself from creating a life you really want to live. You're going to hurt your relationships, and certainly you're going to pass them down to your children, whatever those self-deceptive tendencies are. And at the end of the day, the hardest thing about self-deception is that it will leave you with a great deal of regret, because it is never in our best interest to make choices from a place of weakness and wounds. You always want to make choices from a place of strength. And the only way to do that is to be able to see yourself as honestly, as accurately as possible, and then make decisions based on the information that you learn. And so I really fundamentally believe that the best thing you can do for yourself as a human, if you want to grow and evolve and learn about yourself in life, is to try to be as honest with yourself as possible.
honesty, self-honesty, finding that, what is it that we find? What's the turning point? What's the hinge from going from self-deception and self-lies and suffering the consequences and the costs of that potentially to the opposite, with the gate totally swung the opposite way?
The consequence of being honest is that you have more freedom to create the life that you really want to live. And in some ways, that's really scary. So I say that kind of tongue in cheek because self-deception is very protective. You lie to yourself to keep yourself from having to feel that pain and ouch and yuck that most of us feel when we recognize something about ourselves that we really don't like, or that's really painful or makes us feel very insecure. So it serves that function. But the stronger you get and the more you can tolerate seeing yourself accurately and people around you accurately, the more freedom you have to say, oh, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. Wow, I really need to work on that. I'm going to change this. I don't know how I'm going to do it. It's going to take me a while, but I'm going to start right now because this is not who I want to be. And this is not the life I want to live. So that freedom, there's something so magically attractive about people who are honest with you, even if they say something that really hurts you for a minute, or even if they say something you really wish wasn't true, like you really wish it wasn't, but you respect them for it and you appreciate them over time because you can trust them. When you tell yourself the truth, you can also trust yourself a lot more.
I like that.
It's going to lead you to better outcomes.
Yeah. Well, you've experienced this firsthand, because I know that Dr. Cortney Warren was addicted to perfection, and you overcame your own addiction to perfectionism. So you had to, was that a matter of you eating your own cooking, walking your own talk?
I always try to practice what I preach. So I definitely would say that I think therapy is a massive gift that I hope to give to people, but also get for myself. I've had some fantastic therapists in my life. I journal almost every day. I definitely work my own program. I think that so much of my personal journey was trying to understand why I had reactions that didn't make any objective sense to me. So I shared in my TED Talk and in the book, Lies We Tell Ourselves, some about my background in romantic relationships, because it's something that most people relate to, because we all have to figure ourselves out in relationships in general, but especially in romantic relationships, they tend to trigger us in pretty specific ways. But I also shared it because it truly was the start of my own journey of understanding myself. The first person I fell in love with when I was in college. Having situations happen where objectively nothing was wrong. There was absolutely nothing that was going on, but my reaction was like on fire, flames, devil person. And there was one evening, for example, my boyfriend literally just said to me something like, "So I'm going out with my friends. I'll see you later." And as soon as he left, I was like, panic. What? And objectively, I knew it made no sense. I was looking at myself going, why on earth am I upset about this? There is nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with him going out. There's nothing. What is the deal? When you realize that the objective outside world is in fact a stimulus, and that you have responses that to some degree have to do with the stimulus, but to a large degree have to do with your interpretation, which involves a whole lot of background baggage. You are free, because I was able to start my own journey of saying, So why do I feel this way? Why am I having this reaction? What is going on with me that I need to change so that I don't damage every relationship I'm ever going to be in? Because my feeling and my response would elicit a response of, well, no, you can't go out, or no, I don't want you to go out, or crying, or I'm upset, and my boyfriend would look at me like, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you having this reaction? And I would be looking at myself going, what is wrong with me? I also don't know why I'm having this reaction. There's your freedom. There's your power. There's where you have this profound opportunity to say, well, here's the situation in the outside world that I am clearly interpreting in a specific way based on who I am and my background and my previous learning, that I have to analyze and dig deep to overcome so that I don't have these responses that damage me and everyone around me that are going to leave me with a great deal of regret because I'm going to blame you for my feelings, which is a mistake.
And there's a word that's coming up frequently as we listen to you, Cortney, and that word change. And you are quoted as saying that change is hard. Why is change so hard for us?
We are so set in our ways. Most humans have such a difficult time with change. It's easier to stay the same, even if your status quo is pretty bad, than it is to take this giant leap of faith that requires you to be introspective and honest and more authentic and say, if I admit the truth about myself or about my relationships or about my job or about my drinking or about my body image, my whole life will have to change. That's terrifying to people, just absolutely terrifying. And it's the only way to live a fulfilling life, in my opinion, because you want to make choices based on what you need so that you aren't left with regret. And only you know what you need to create meaning in your life. So at the end of the day, no one can tell you how to live. No one can tell you what you need. No one can tell you exactly how to evolve. Yet, learning to trust yourself enough and develop enough self-esteem and sense of self-worth and value that you know you can get through anything that comes your way. A tsunami is going to knock you over. You're going to lose your house. You're going to lose your friends, and you're going to be okay, is the greatest gift you'll ever give yourself.
Many of our listeners and viewers will know of the 12-step programs, and I've been through 12-step programs in my recovery in the past. And one of the things as part of 12-step recovery is what's called the serenity prayer. And so grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. This moment of being able to decipher between what's, first of all, you mentioned earlier the outside world and the internal world, and the outside world and the stimulus and that space between the stimulus and the response or the reaction. So I find, for what it's worth, that being in a moment when you mentioned earlier being in pain, being ouchy, feeling yucky, being in that terrible headspace where it feels like everything's closing in around you. It's not easy, I found, and others have found, it's not so easy to be able to be reflective and have that headspace where you can be objective and then look at the subjective thoughts that are going on. But it is such an important vehicle to reaching that freedom that you speak about. What do you say to the viewer or the listener who's thinking, yeah, okay, Dr. Cortney Warren, all of that makes philosophical sense, but in my world where I don't have enough money to pay rent, I'm looking at being thrown out of home, being homeless, I don't have anywhere for my kids or my cats. What can I do in the next 1 hour to possibly bring about the change that I know is going to be hard.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to finish your prayer and say the courage to change the things I can't.
Yes.
Because you start where you are. You may find yourself in a situation that's objectively incredibly hard. You, as you described, you might be a person who's working 2 jobs, struggling to make ends meet, not doing so well. You start there. Wherever you go, there you are. And you say, what do I have control over today that I can choose to do to help myself or hurt myself? Hurt other people or help other people? What choices am I going to make that I do have control over? It may be as simple as exactly what you just said, pausing. I say pause a lot because it's that space. So I'm having a response. I'm going to literally just pause and sit here and try to let myself observe what I'm feeling, what the situation is, what I want to be doing, how I'd like to act out. And I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to give in to any urges or cravings. I'm not going to be impulsive. I'm just going to sit here, and it's incredibly uncomfortable. And that's the step that I can choose to make today to get to know myself better and stop the dysfunctional patterns that I usually am in when I don't pause, which is what happens when we respond really quickly, usually from a pained place. And then you start there and you do that every day. And you say, okay, this is the reality of my life right now. What are some things that I can do today that I do have control over to help myself?
I love hearing you say that we can think to ourselves, if we just take that pause moment, what can I do in the next moment to either help myself or hurt myself, help this situation or hurt this situation, help them or hurt them? I love hearing that. In fact, I don't think I've heard that put like that before. Now, all right, so as we begin to wind up our discussion, and I've been loving this conversation with you, Cortney, and I know our viewers and listeners will too. So because, I know it's happening in the States, it's happening here in Australia, and it's just so sad and scary that lives, unfortunately, are being ended at one's own hand, and that's the extreme case of being in a painful, ouchy, yucky state of mind. And it just doesn't have to. I'm a survivor of attempted suicide, so I can speak firsthand. It just doesn't have to be that way, but we hear not platitudes, well-meaning suggestions online or from others, seek help. Talk to a professional. But there can be, particularly old school baby boomer men like me, we're brought up to just get tough and pull up your socks and get on with things. But it's not, that doesn't apply these days, I don't believe. I know it doesn't apply and it shouldn't apply. What's the best way for someone who, okay, let's speak directly to somebody who's listening or watching you now, Cortney, who really connects with what's being said, what you've been talking about. And they think, all right, I do need to do something. I do need to talk to a professional. What's the best way that they can go about that? Maybe they've never done it before.
Oh, my goodness. I bet Australia has a hotline that is for suicide prevention. I don't know what it is, but I guarantee there is one, and you could even put it out there for your listeners. As we've been talking about kind of this entire time, so much of the human experience is about choice. And at some point, you have to decide if you're going to make the choice to help yourself or to self-implode.
Yeah.
And I get that is so hard, especially in the moment where you're feeling the most pained. It starts with one small choice. And it's the compounding effect of hundreds of little tiny choices. They seem little tiny, but they're not. Little tiny choices you make over the course of each day that will ultimately help you heal. So it starts with making that phone call, finding a reason to stay alive, thinking to yourself, what reason do I have to still be here? What can I do for myself today to connect with that? What am I grateful for? Who am I going to hurt if I'm not on this planet anymore? Start thinking very critically with yourself, and any of those seemingly small steps that you're doing are the pathway out eventually. It's one small thing at a time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cortney Warren. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your professional wisdom and comments. And our viewers and our listeners can find more about you, your work. They can read your blog, Naked Truth blog, and they visit drcortney.com. That'll be in the show notes and also blazoned across the screen that viewers are watching now on YouTube. And it's been such a pleasure, Cortney, and I wish you, well, what projects are you working on at the moment, by the way? What's on your plate right at this moment?
Oh, I just finished a book on love addiction and breakups, actually. So for anyone who is struggling to get over a former love, which many people do, it's a self-help book written for you.
Wonderful. Well, maybe that's an opportunity if there's time down the track once that's. Did you say it's being published as we speak, or it's just?
It is. It's called Letting Go of Your Ex. It will come out in January 2023.
Okay. Well, maybe in 2023 after it's out and released, Cortney, we can do this again. I'd love to.
Absolutely. Sounds like fun. I would be happy to.
Oh, thank you. So Dr. Cortney Warren, board-certified psychologist. You'll find her at Dr. Cortney, all one word, DrCortney, drcortney.com. And to you, our viewer, to our listener, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Comeback Coach podcast. Until next time, this is Mike Searles signing off. Be well.